He's running a little late, so he'll join us here in a few minutes. I think we have a big agenda today, some really interesting things coming up I think to be really excited about. And so let's go ahead and get started. So happy holidays. And I guess this is our last meeting before the new year. So it'll be great to be with you guys today. So go ahead, let's get started.
Great. Good morning, everybody. We'll start off with an update on filings from Jeff. We'll then move into an update on the rental assistance and working group programs from Renee. And I think that hopefully Cynthia or someone from Catholic Charities will be able to join us. Elaine will then give an overview of just kind of the work stream progress. And I think one thing that we just wanted to note is at that point, we're going to actually then do a deep dive into the rental assistance working group recommendations. And we'll have a discussion or be able to have questions and to vote on those. And then excited to hear from a national perspective on some really interesting work that's going on around the country. So with that, why don't we turn it over to Jeff?
All right, thank you so much, Stephen. Appreciate it. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here. I wish I had better news this week. December is kind of the mini bump of eviction cases filed historically, December and January, with the peak being the summer months, May through September. So what we're seeing right now is that eviction activity is officially trending upwards. And that's troubling. I've been saying it for the last few meetings that, you know, it's been a slight uptick, but it's still within the normal bounds. Now it's actually starting to trend upwards. And what this means, I put together some thoughts here. Won't take very long to walk through, but we're also seeing about 2,300 cases on the docket, which includes over 150 over the next week. What this means is that right now we're trending at about 70% of the average number of cases filed in December. Typically, we've been at about 30 to 50%. So through the peak season, we were at 30 to 50% of average number of cases filed, which, you know, in the context of Houston is good. But now we're starting to see it go up a little bit. The month isn't over yet, and we're heading into a peak season with January. And so I think that we should prepare to see an increase in eviction cases filed. And you know that I try to be relatively reserved in predicting the future because obviously previous data isn't necessarily going to inform us about what's going to happen next. There could be a stimulus package. There could be, you know, extended rental assistance. We've been very surprised this year with the amount of support that's come from all different angles. But barring anything really substantial, we should prepare to see an increase in eviction cases filed in January and potentially even going back to our normal volume, which is very high, and potentially even higher than our normal volume. So let's keep our fingers crossed that more interventions can be staged. I did want to highlight that the number of defendants assisted by attorneys continues to increase. What you see here on the bottom is that over 5% this month in December have been assisted by attorneys. And again, we have a lot of cases filed this month. Previous to the pandemic, January through March, we averaged fewer than 2%. And then since the summer months, we've really hovered around 2 or 3%. And in the last quarter, we've seen a steady increase from 4.5% to 5% and now greater than 5%. So that's really, that's a great trend. I'm going to continue highlighting this metric, but I'm going to qualify it every time by saying that this metric is derived based on the total number of cases. So if the total number of cases filed goes up, the number of available attorneys is limited. So the percentage of cases that are going to be represented with attorneys is going to go down. So a lot of this depends on steady case filing to be able to address what's already going through the system. With that increase, we're going to see a decrease in a lot of these KPIs that we look at. Does anybody have any questions? Well, I wish I had better news going into the holidays, but it gives us a lot to think about. And yeah, thank you for the opportunity to present.
Thanks, Jeff. Rick, you want to, Renee, you want to go ahead and present now? Or does Cynthia want to start?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, we're on. All right, excellent. So we continue. I'm going to go ahead and load here if my laptop will allow me here. While it's loading, I'll just go ahead and say what I wanted to mention there. So we've been doing some very close monitoring of projections for the rental assistance program and to determine where we're going to be at the end of the year. Not sure, maybe I mentioned this before, but due to timing and the way that the applications, just the timing and of the processing of the applications, as well as the looming December 30th timeline for the end or the expiration of the CARES Act dollars. We've been working with the county, Harris County, about some projections for the end of the year. And we ended up settling in that we felt that by the end of the year, we would have 30 million of the initial $40 million allocated for Harris County spent by December 30th. Things did speed up for us quite a bit on Harris County in the last few weeks, somewhat due to the changing of the requirements for documentation for the tenants. So good changes have been happening on that front. Nonetheless, we had the looming December 30th deadline, so we had to kind of tell the county where we thought we would end up with. So they took back 10 million of the $40 million that we had from Harris County for rental assistance, and they used that to allocate to direct assistance and other areas of need. So what I wanted to share with you was where we are towards those 30 millions. And I just shared that this morning with Harris County. It does seem at this point highly likely that we'll spend all of the funds. We've already paid of Harris County, and can y'all see my spreadsheet here? Yeah. So we've paid out of Harris County alone. This does not include the $30 million from the city nor the $5 million of private funds. This only includes the what was originally the 40 millions from the county and now 30 million. So we have paid 16,678 tenants for a total of 20,197,000. We already have queued up another $6 million that are already pledged, meaning that eligibility is done. A confirmation has gone out to the landlord and to the tenant that they're going to get payment. And the only thing that's pending is for us to issue the checks, which would happen on Monday. So another $6 million will go out on Monday. And that leaves $3.7 million left that we need to spend from now until December 30th. So we've looked at what we have in applications and work in progress. We've looked at how tenants are complying with the documentation requirements. And we feel strongly that all $30 million will be spent and out the door by December 30th. Then, of course, going a little bit to Jeff's comments is like, well, what happens next? You know, with still some rising evictions. That's it in terms of Baker Ripley's funds that we have available, both from the city and the county. They would have all have been spent by December 30th. So the lingering issue now is, again, what happens in January, February, first quarter, second quarter of 2021 if the stimulus package doesn't pass or if it doesn't get the right amount of rental assistance. Those kind of things are probably what's going to weigh on us as a task force here in the next few weeks about what happens next. So any questions on that?
So Renee, you spent all the city money, the 30 million and the extra 5 million of private, correct?
Yeah, we still have a little bit left of the private, and the private funds have been used as a combination of both direct assistance program and rental assistance. But we do have a little bit left. We might have maybe less than $1 million going into January, And we're holding that back purposely to see if there's any really drastic situations where a tenant needs funding through that private sources to avoid evictions or to avoid other issues.
Yeah, and the private sources don't have a November 31 deadline too, correct?
Correct, they do not.
Okay, thanks. Hopefully I'll get a stimulus package done. And my understanding was there was $35 billion in the package for rental assistance. You're on mute, Renee. Is that what you've heard?
Sorry about that. I was locked out as muted. Yeah. So the one thing that we've seen is obviously the current stimulus package that's being considered in Congress does include the rental assistance program funds. What I'm not sure about at this point, and maybe somebody else who's kind of following that legislation might know, is how it's different from how we've received previous rental assistance funds. So the funds that we received from Harris County and from the city of Houston, there were funds that directly came to local municipalities. It was part of the CARES Act funds that went to local jurisdictions. Apparently, I've seen in some analysis that that's not the case going forward in the second stimulus package, that a lot of the funding that had been earmarked for local jurisdictions may be coming down differently. So that's a big question that we have is, okay, yes, there's some rental assistance funds in the stimulus plan, but how are they going to be administered going forward? Do they go to the states, or do they go, in some other manner to the local municipalities? What's the sort of the footnote on that extra rental assistance funds that are there?
I was on a call with Senator Cornyn a couple of days ago, and he expressed that he thought that it would pass at some point, and then there was a discussion about, we did have a discussion specifically about the 35 billion. He didn't say how it was going to flow, but there was I think part of the bill also had an AMI number of like 50% of AMI, that the 35 billion could only go to 50% of AMI. So, and there was some concern that that was too low a threshold. And so or at least I mentioned that to him as like we need more flexibility in how the funds flow, and less check 50 boxes for somebody to have to qualify. And he agreed with that, but who knows? We'll see how it goes. I'm not sure that the actual senators and congressmen that vote on this thing actually have exactly how it's going to flow. I think it becomes the agencies that send the money out, right? So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it'll pass and there'll be decent money coming in for renters.
Great. Thank you, Renee. Cynthia, you want to give us an update on where you guys are?
Can everyone see the screen? Okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So where we are as of the 16th is we've done 42,364 households. The original goal was around 41,000. We're at 42. But with the extra funding, the final goal will be 51,166 households. The projected end date for distributing the dollars is 12/28. We're processing just over 1 million a day. And that involves, as you know, looking at the application, making sure all the documentation is there, following up with the client. And we've been pleased to see that most people are taking ACH transactions. We do provide opportunities for people to pick up checks, and then the smallest amount have been mailed. The funds spent to date, at least through the 16th, was just over $50 million, 51. We've got just about 10 million to go. And on the rate we're at, again, the projected end date is 12/28/20. So we do have commitment of $1,750,000 for the undocumented households that we have. So our projection is that that would be allocated by the 18th of January. We'll start those right after we get back from the holiday break. This is just a projection. It never runs a straight line, even though that's how you'd like it to go. So as we all the applications are in, there's not going to be a new application. So just to let you know, we take them in chunks. And so that's how the funds we project out based on the experience we've been having, that this is how it's going to flow over those 18 days. And then just so you know, the current number of undocumented applications from the undocumented in the system total, the amount that the total undocumented 5,776. Of that, with the funding that we have, just 25% will be able to be served. So 1,458 households. And this just shows you by precinct. The goal was to have a pretty even distribution. And we worked hard with Connective to track that and to make sure that we were tracking people by precinct. Precinct 2 had an additional 1,400,000, so that you'll see that there. So we're pretty close. The largest number have gone to precinct 1, followed by precinct 4, and then you'll see that precinct 2 and 3 are about even at just over $11 million. So we'll have a year end for you, or a final number for you in January, sort of how it plays out. But that's where we are today, and we expect to be busy all the way through the 28th of this month. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Did you have any funds that had to go back as well, like Baker Ripley did?
No, this is, I mean, we had 40 million, we already allocated out that. So they provided an additional 21 million, and we're on track to spend that extra money down by the 28th. If not, we'll go to the 30th, but we expect to spend it all by the end of the period.
And did you have different parameters than Baker Ripley? The issue that we had over there was the fact that people didn't have proper documentation. Did the lowering the documentation hurdle that Harris County did help you in that regard?
I'm sure, but different than the rental assistance program, there was no need for a landlord to participate at all. So, and these applications were all submitted in July through, I believe, in July or June, and then again an application period November 2nd through November 8th. There was more flexibility in these funds, as Renee, you're experiencing with your direct assistance dollars. The individual has to show need, so a past due bill, late rent, etc. And then they self-certify that when they state what their needs are, it could be rent, medication. They just self-certify that the funds will be used for those needs.
So Renee, what was the issue that caused the $10 million not to be spent on the county side and your side? Was it just that it was more technical because a different set of bucket of funds and a different set of requirements? Is that what happened?
Well, first off, looking at the entire universe, the universe for rental assistance is limited to those tenants whose landlords are participating. So the universe of applications that Cynthia received for direct assistance was much larger than the number of applications we received. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we did work through the county. We launched earlier than Cynthia did on rental assistance. But as we worked through the county and kind of started getting these issues come up about documentation requirements, the county did relax back on some of those, provided some alternatives such as self-certifications so that the tenant didn't necessarily have to provide documents that they didn't have. available to them. And some of those changes, because of timing, carried over into the direct assistance program. So because we started before that program started, the direct assistance program got the benefit of some of those relaxed or optional other options for documentation requirements. Not to take away from the work that Cynthia and her staff have done. Again, I went out there to visit their site, and it's amazing work that they've done. But I think it was a learning process for the county, and as they rolled out these programs, they got better about which documentation requirements were needed and what supplemental certifications people can provide to get them through the finish line.
I mean, documentation wise, I don't think it was burdensome. I don't know if you'd agree, because, you know, I have had people ask for rent assistance through Catholic Charities for our limited dollars. And I think we've distributed upwards of almost 2 million of our own funding through grants and donations. And so we would refer them, of course, first. Our goal was to use up the CARES Act funding for rent assistance. And sometimes the landlords wouldn't agree to participate for whatever reason, even though the outreach had been done. So with the direct assistance, of course, it was not that burdensome, I don't think, in terms of documentation for what people normally have to apply for. And secondly, the turnaround on the payment could be done quickly through ACH or, you know, check pickup or mail up. And then, you know, I think the ability to self-certify and use the check for what they need. But we did hear what are the top needs. So when you're looking at the applications and talking to the clients or the applicants, it is rent, it is basic needs, it's medical costs. So it's what we would anticipate anyone needing is if they've had a loss of job or reduction in hours or increased expenses because due to COVID.
Yeah, but it definitely didn't have to go to rent. It went to whatever their top priority
Absolutely.
was, which
Yeah.
is
That's just one of the things that they would mention. Here's the different things that we need. And but then by the time they get the payment, they can use it for whatever need they've identified.
And is that the total amount, the whole 50 million that you're you project to be spent is going to be
61 million, 61 something. So just over 61 million will be allocated by the 28th, and then an additional 1.7 million for serving and document. I'm just trying to raise a little bit more so I can at least get to 2 million. But you know, I've got asks out there right now.
And from us, we have on the direct assistance, just as a reminder, Catholic Charities has been kind enough to allow us to supplement their work with City of Houston funds. So using their applications, using their system, we also have $20 million from city funds that will be spent in direct assistance by December 30th. So when you look at her numbers, just add the numbers from the city, that's essentially the same program.
And we do have a question from Curtis.
Thank you, Renee and Cynthia and Jeff, for your great work, and also you, Elena. Is it feasible and practical for you to look at your data sets after this work, once you get a breath, and begin to see what the geographic distribution was by zip code and or census tract, if you have access to the address data easily, to begin to see how our outreach is touching people. And then the second issue around this question of direct assistance versus rental assistance, is there information that can be gleaned beyond what we infer based on our experience to kind of look at the data to see if we can confirm patterns that say direct assistance is a more effective way of addressing this crisis than rental assistance, or rental assistance is more effective in these sorts of conditions? Something that might help us inform future responses in terms of hopefully future round of CARES Act funding.
Curtis, we'll be working with University of Notre Dame, their LEO project. It's the LEO lab, and it's a lab set up for research around poverty alleviation. and poverty reduction. And so they'll be working with us to look at the data and specifically around the question around, the ability of the individual to receive the funds and what difference that made. So I'll provide some information about that in January. We're just kind of finalizing. They'll be looking at all the data around those core questions. There may be other questions that the task force has. I don't know that we're gonna, Renee, we'd have to just how we divide it by zip code. I know that, and I don't know if Elena's on the phone, but definitely by precinct. And that was our measure, is to look at it by precinct. And of course, to get to precinct, we had to have addresses and zip codes to be able to plug that in.
Well, on the rental assistance, Curtis, to answer your question about data, both by geographies and social vulnerability indexes and those kind of things, and I'll pass this on to Stephen as well, because he's been instrumental on that as with LISC, we've been partnering with them. But we are gonna do an evaluation of the rental assistance program in partnership with the Kinder Institute and the Policy Lab, and Stephen connected us with them, and that's in the works so that we have a thorough independent evaluation of the effectiveness of rental assistance. So similar in 2021, we'll start sharing the results of that evaluation. And just to personally to address the point you made about what's more effective between direct assistance and rental assistance, I had a conversation with the county earlier this week, and basically, in my opinion, it's a combination of both. It's not either or. We need both. In particular, when you compare direct assistance, as I noted earlier, with when we were talking about the rental assistance and direct assistance program, you have a much broader universe when you're dealing with direct assistance, because as Cynthia mentioned, you can use those funds to pay for any bills. But we must not lose sight that the vulnerability of eviction, or the impacts of eviction, is of utmost importance, and it's very serious, more serious, some would argue, than if you didn't pay your phone bill, or if you didn't pay, or if you fell behind on some of your other bills. So it's that looming eviction and homelessness issue that increases the need for some prioritization of rental assistance funds. And that was my opinion. That's what I shared with the county judge's office earlier this week, because it's easier to distribute the direct assistance dollars. And again, it's partly because you have a broader universe, but the extreme situations would be, do you use those funds? Do you not leverage those funds to address the potential eviction issues and homelessness issues? So.
Are you seeing the screen that I'm sharing right now? Elena, you're on the call. Can you?
Yes, yeah. So, and we're as Renee and Cynthia mentioned, we're Connected will also be helping and partnering on the evaluation. We have with January Advisors have built this data map for the Catholic Charities data, and we're working with Moksha data on similar mapping for the rental assistance program. This is a couple weeks out to date. I just emailed my team to make sure to get them January Advisors some updated data to update this, but you can go in and zoom into specific census tracts and see how many households were funded here, and layer it on with the social vulnerability index and some other vulnerability criteria.
This is great.
Stuck this in the chat.
This is great, and Elena and all of you who are working on it. The other part of my question has to do with the effectiveness of the outreach, and in using the data to determine how effective the outreach mechanisms are, and from the precinct data to look at population densities by dollar per precinct, to begin to get an idea of a version of a per capita assistance index for each of the precincts, so that we can begin to understand how the money affects poverty in a given precinct based on its population and economic distribution, as opposed to equal distribution of dollars. You follow where I'm coming from there? That is, I know it's important for each of the precincts politically to say we've got an equal amount of money, but each precinct might have a significant variation in its need. And we ought to understand what exactly we're doing, even though we may want to distribute equally politically, it may have a variable need, and we could develop an index that might in the future allow us to more equitably distribute the money. And the same is true around effectiveness of outreach. And graphically, heat maps might be a better tool to begin to see that, so that we can begin to see how penetration in a particular area around participation of programs as it relates to the economics of that area and density of that area are functioning. We've got all that data. The question is having the time to think about it and use it to get some deeper insights.
Well, and how, I mean, the
Right.
question is, how would it even be used? I mean, that, I think it's all interesting. You know, effectiveness of outreach. Remember that the majority of the applications were all done in the summer. And those were through a huge variety of agencies, as I recall, Alina, when we worked through the applications submitted, I guess you'd say round one of the CARES Act for direct assistance, working with the Community Foundation, United Way, and Connective at the time. And so, I mean, the application process was distributed through a wide variety of nonprofits at that time. The decision to go with, I guess, two larger agencies, we didn't open up applications. And again, this was kind of part of the design we received to do a 1 week addition for new applicants. And we could talk about the outreach we did, but it was through a lot of different, I guess, media and agencies and sharing with all of you. So I think it's, and we received, I don't know, Elena, did we get like we got over 50,000, 60,000 applications during that week, as I recall. So he had around 500,000 applications. That was the pool for Baker Ripley and for Catholic Charities. So I think it's understanding what we've done, and then the question is the efficacy of it, and what would change if there's another round of funding for that we could recommend changes to any future rounds of CARES Act or whatever the version is for rental assistance. So
Yeah,
I think
that's
If I
that's
can,
exactly
maybe
the-
just- if
that's
I-
exactly
If
the
I can
point.
interrupt, Mary's got a question, and then I think we need to move on. So we can come back to this conversation later. We have
Yes.
time.
Thank you. So I think this is more of a comment. I just wanted to call to the attention of the task force the continuing challenge that landlords are having with a small minority, but still a significant number of tenants who are not taking advantage of rental assistance programs and are not paying the rent. So at Avenue, we have, about 700 apartments, and we've got about 40 or so tenants who haven't paid the rent. It's at this point, about $100,000 of overdue rent, despite the really best efforts of our managers to contact them repeatedly and let them know about the rental assistance programs that we, of course, are participating in, and the direct assistance programs that, I don't think would have any way of knowing if they're obtaining those funds. And it puts us in a real bind because we have other tenants who may be in similar situations who are doing their best to pay what the rent they can, who are entering into payment agreements to, pay the past due rent over time. So it's not really fair to those folks who are really trying to meet their obligations to let these tenants who are not paying the rent, go on indefinitely in our housing. And I've heard the same from other nonprofit housing providers around the city that this is a real challenge, with the moratoriums that some tenants feel that they just don't have to pay rent anymore. So I know we've talked about it in the past, but I just want to make sure that, you know, it stays on people's radar, because, you know, we're really at our wits' end, and we have a pretty, you know, robust staff. So our resident services advisors, our housing counselors are all also reaching out to these tenants now, if we have permission to, because there are privacy issues, to really try and plead with them to take advantage of these programs that are being made available to them. But, you know, at some point, like I said, it's just not fair to all the tenants who are paying the rent. So I want to put it back out there for this task force, you know, because I really don't want to show up in January advisors reports as having evicted anyone as a charity, a charitable organization, but I'm not sure what else we can do.
I appreciate your weighing in on that, Mary, because I think that is exactly why we wanted to have the diverse group of stakeholders involved in this conversation. And I think as a mission-driven property owner, I think you just really put this in a really powerful way for us to think about and reflect upon. So thank you.
And I will say, Stephen, that there's no difference with what Mary said about nonprofits with for-profits. It's the same deal. They have the same issues, the same equation, and that's what we just need to make sure it's not just nonprofits. It's
I understand, and I did not mean to suggest otherwise. I simply meant that, you know, that at the end of the day, a for-profit company owes a duty to its shareholders and a nonprofit doesn't, and that's the only, it's driven by its mission and its charitable purpose as its North Star. That's all I meant.
cash flow is still cash flow.
Fair enough. Yes, I mean, not nonprofit, a better way to describe it is non-tax paying.
Mary's Apartments, thank you.
Okay, so Elaine, if we can, we obviously are going to need to quickly move through your presentation. And at the end of this, we're going to come back to the working group recommendations from the rental assistance working group. So go ahead, Elaine.
Good morning, everyone. We wanted to do an end of year recap of what we've done together and the things we've discussed or moved forward. With our work streams, the first one is responding to requests from either city or county. In July 2020, we submitted a Grace Period ordinance recommendation to the city of Houston that the majority, if not all of the members with an exemption enough abstain, wanted to move forward, and it did not get to city council. Then we got a direction from the county that to create an access to justice work group to work on a web resource, centralized web resource for renters assistance. And the access to justice work group will see what they did with that later. And then in August 2020, we worked to provide rent assistance principles and early recommendations to the city and the county on what principles rent assistance programs should consider. And as you all know, early December, we submitted a statement on CDC order expiring at the end of the year. We'll have these slides and can read the details on each of these later. I'm going to jump in right there, Elaine, and just give people a quick update on the letter that we sent to Judge Hidalgo. You all may remember that we asked that they suggest modifications to the Texas Eviction Diversion Program, and that specifically we expressed concern about that subgroup of tenants who already had eviction filings and had issues that were pending, or writs of possession that were pending.
And I'm delighted to report that with Jeff's excellent support, we were able to actually, or Jeff was able to go and identify that at the time of, I think, last week, there were about 1,600 people who had gone through the eviction process and had a writ issued that was going to potentially be delivered by the constable after the lifting of any eviction ban. The total amount of rent due that was at the time of filing of those eviction actions for that 1,600 tenants was $4.5 million. So that was the amount owed. Now, of course, they probably continued to accrue rent during the time when they were occupying the unit after an eviction filing had occurred. But that just gives you an idea of the order of magnitude for that group. The second and last thing that I'll just report, and I'll circulate the letter afterwards, but the judge issued a letter to the Supreme Court, and she specifically followed our recommendations, saying that she wanted the Supreme Court to reinstate the protections that Texas renters deserve by suspending all eviction hearings for non-payment of rent as we wait for the appropriate federal relief, extend and fully fund the Texas Eviction Diversion Program by appropriating funding either from other federal sources that are not time limited and or state laws, and then making eligibility changes to the eviction diversion program. So I just really think that we owe the judge a terrific thanks for conveying the concerns that we had directly to the Supreme Court. All right, go ahead, Elaine.
Thanks, Stephen. We also worked on developing recommendations through the work groups. The rental assistance work group has completed their recommendations and before submitting their final recommendations, they refined early recommendations on how to best align city and county programs. They worked on a rental assistance auction concept to expand other ways to provide and distribute rental assistance to more tenants, and submitted to you all the final comprehensive recommendations for rent and direct assistance program. The Access to Justice work group will reconvene in the new year. They focus on early intervention recommendations that could help both tenant and landlord to avoid the entry into the formal eviction process, and was instrumental to start the work on a pilot project that we'll describe later. And the landlord and property stabilization work group is ongoing and focused on potential projects, recommendations, and initiatives that support small to medium-sized landlords. On the recommendations, the rental assistance work group met this year, the last time in December 3rd, reviewed and agreed on a set of recommendations that were presented to the task force. 9 task force members participated on the voting process, so we have to yet receive a supermajority vote to move this forward. The Access to Justice work group met 3 times and were presented with recommendations in which we thought there was broad agreement with in late November. We should have reconvened after collecting the comments and feedback from members on those recommendations. So the group will reconvene after the holidays and discuss how to move forward. As I said, the landlord and property stabilization work group will continue to reconvene after the holidays. And yesterday we hosted our first kickoff meeting with the policy response team, which will be reviewing and providing policy priority recommendations to the task force early next year. And then this is a recap of special projects. We wanted to let you know where these kind of spin-offs from work group recommendations were. The tenant and landlord CBO pilot project is ongoing. 3 local CBOs, the Alliance, MAM, and Wesley are participating. And you can read the details later, and the proposal for this pilot is in our website. decentralized web resource for renters assistance. The initial proposal is also on our website for your review. Some challenges have come up, like in identifying a long-term owner of the resource and collaborator with Harris County Community Service Department. There's concerns about duplicating any efforts that are already out there and the timing and availability of funding. So there's the recommendation that the work group to look back at these challenges and provide further recommendations on how to move this tool or identify what additional assistance might be missing, and that could be helpful for tenants and landlords. And the rent assistance auction model concept, even though it did not, it wasn't implemented currently here in Houston, representatives from United Way, Dallas, and the city of Dallas reached out and are currently exploring the model for Dallas. We also received a request from the county about providing data snapshots. We put together kind of a look back at the COVID-19 timeline, eviction filings. Thanks, January Advisor, for keeping us up to date with those. We also are including how Houston compares with other cities. And then looking at unemployment claims versus how many of those claims received unemployment insurance and support throughout the pandemic. Thanks for United Way 211 data. Also, we are tracking as well potential housing stability indicators through the calls that they receive. And even though December might look like it's less, that's only half of the month. So we're seeing, again, a trend moving up on 211 calls for rent assistance, utility assistance, income assistance, and other housing and homeless services. We want to thank other task force members and collaborators for sharing some of the initiatives they're doing. Connective, the Home Coalition, and FIEL continue to partner to connect tenants to resources. They have shared, they share 2 to 3 texts with resources every week and have shared 322,258 total texts. They're seeing a growing need for eviction prevention protections and rental assistance availability that goes beyond the month of November. The Housing Eviction Solidarity Network is volunteers that are watching the courts, and they report that newly appointed JPs are promising increased access to the courts, that the Supreme Court of Texas stipulation to attach the CDC order to notices is not consistently followed, and that the Texas Eviction Diversion Program approval timeline is becoming an issue. There are also issues with recouping more than the claim amount at the time of filing. And you can see our monthly updates in our website. All the meetings are there, the agendas, the slides, and any recommendations that the task force have agreed upon, and guest presentations as well. Thank you. Stephen, I'm going to let you move forward with this.
Great, thank you, Elaine. The next piece, I'm just, again, as you all saw, we thought that sort of we would be able to conduct a vote of the task force of the 2 different working group final recommendations by email. The miscommunication that I referenced, oh gosh, I'm getting the bad audio. Okay,
Okay, Stephen is resolving the audio issues, but we really wanted for Marta Macris to share with you all a recap of the rental assistance recommendations. Only 9 task force members have voted on these recommendations. These were approved and reviewed by the rental assistance work group. So I'm going to share my screen and allow Martha to go through them.
Okay, good morning, everyone. As you've heard throughout at these meetings, the Rent Assistance Work Group has worked really diligently throughout the tenure of our life as a task force. And I want to mention the members once again, because it's been an excellent group to work with. We have people from the ground like Renee Solis and Cynthia Colbert, along with Mary Lawler and Sonia G and Sharon Zachary. Sonia's from Memorial Assistance Ministries as a provider, and Sharon Zachary represents the Alliance of Community Assistance Ministries. The other members included Diana Zarzuelo, Maria Verdejas, Howard Bookstaff, Mark Teal, Jeff Reichman, Zoe Middleton, who couldn't be here today, unfortunately, Celeste Peterson, Chriselle Pele, Anna Rausch from the Coalition, and Elena White. And I want to once again thank them for their willingness to dig in and really grapple with some of the fine details of what it takes to do rent assistance in an equitable and reasonable way. So we spent quite a bit of time talking about rent assistance and how it worked best. As you heard from both Renee and Cynthia, our recommendations to the city and county have been listened to and helped them to pay attention to how rent assistance is delivered and making it client friendly. And we learned about other cities and how they do programs as well, and looked very closely at both direct rent assistance and direct assistance programs. So we came up with some overall recommendations. And the first one was that we really felt that direct assistance early on in the crisis was really valuable. And again, this is because of it preserves the dignity of the households, but also understanding that most households make rent payment their one financial priority. They know that it's going to have the most impact. And so they will give up other things in their household budgets in order to make that rent payment. Sometimes, depending on the timing of funding available, rent may be paid, so they don't qualify for rent assistance, but they've given up other basic needs, most often utilities, which then leave them sometimes subject to eviction after all, and also food, medicine, and other things that keep, car insurance is a big one as well. What we also found out is that most of the families use direct assistance for their most important bills. I think locally, one of the interesting studies that was done was from Baker Ripley's free tax service program. And those families who get earned income tax credit, most of those families pay their major bills, and some of them even pay rent forward when they get that earned income tax credit along with their tax refund. You heard from Cynthia about the direct assistance being very efficient, it's less complex and often less burdensome. So we know that it's important to have direct assistance, but we also understand that it's important, as Renee said, to have both types of assistance available, and that together they cover the wider range of needs. Aligning the city and county rent utility direct assistance programs, that really has been a challenge throughout COVID and had been in the past, problems during other crises as well. And I think that we've showed some good progress on that. And so our eligibility requirements, we want them to be clear on both sides, and they should be the same. They should not be required to improve imminent threat of eviction. That's a terminology that often comes from the world of homelessness and certainly the courts, but that we should be able to provide assistance to people earlier in the process before things become dire. We should be able to help immigrants independent of their immigration status, and that we should, because they are a vulnerable population, show special concern and make application process very available to them. Flexible use of rent assistance so that it covers arrears, utilities, and moving costs if someone is going to have to move. And that the full funding mixing sources really create a wider range for tenants in need. And we're seeing that being done really successfully between Catholic Charities and Baker Ripley right now. In Houston, the priority target populations would be low and very low income families and cost burdens with high rent, and to really pay attention to the historically divested communities of color. We also showed concern in prioritizing families with children residing in low-cost housing, and that the application and selection process should be designed to ensure that funding is allocated accordingly, according to these priorities. We like the randomized distribution of eligible applicants, which Connective, I have to give them kudos for bringing that into play in our city at this time. And that people who have mixed status, families and residents with criminal records should also be available. Go ahead. Can you scroll down a little? That we want to make sure that there's long-term housing stabilities, and that the commitment not to evict tenants who receive rental assistance, and this is one of the values of rental assistance, is getting that commitment, and that the minimum would be at the end of the month following the month in which someone received rental assistance. And that landlords should be required to execute a payment plan when the rental assistance couldn't eliminate all the prior debt. So communication, this is really important, and you could hear that in Cynthia's report, that we want to make sure that the word gets out as far and wide as possible, and lots of ways to do that. And I think providers have done a great job communicating to their populations, but we also need to be able to access public media as well. The user experience, that's something that is, and I just have to say, as a former provider, it is so helpful to get the feedback that this can be done better, and to be able to use technology, texting, making places available for people who can't access technology, and really flexible type of payment as well. That can often be a barrier. And one of our long-term goals is really to build the legal capacity for direct financial assistance and rent assistance beyond emergencies and post-disasters. So I think there's a strong commitment from this group to continue to collaborate in one way or another. And our pilot projects are also underway. The tenant-landlord facilitated conversations kicked off. We're now seeing clients as of the beginning of December. And the rent assistance landlord auction concept, was captured up in Dallas. We're still holding hope that we may be able to institute something here in Houston. And of course, using independent evaluation of rent assistance programs to really determine the impact and outcomes achieved, develop, and I wish we could get more independent evaluators available to us in Houston to make that a little bit easier. But not only conducting those evaluations, but then hosting roundtables where everyone who's involved with this could hear the results and see and make some decisions and really learn from each other. It would be most valuable to the community. So that's our report. And if anyone has any questions, most of the members of the work group are here today, and they're available to answer questions as well as I.
So let us know if you have any question. And the bigger question is if task force members that have not voted yet would be, ready or open to submit a vote now.
Yeah, I think the question is, so what we would like to do is, since we asked people to vote online and we only have 8 votes, I would like to try to get questions. Anybody have questions about this? And I would like to try to get a vote of the task force after questions. I think that Martha, the subgroup voted unanimously to approve this, correct?
To bring it forward to the task force, yeah.
Yes, yeah, to bring it forward to the task force. So if I think we can use the next 5 or so minutes to talk about. Do you have anybody have any real problems with this or questions about it? I mean, I think it's very thoughtful. I think there's clearly a lot of good in it. I mean, you could pick at various parts of it, but overall, I think it's a really good program, and I really appreciate, Martha, you and your your subcommittee coming up with such a thoughtful document.
They're a great group.
We do
So,
have one question from Alan.
I guess we'll take questions.
And we do have one question from Alan.
Okay, Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Rick. I absolutely agree with you. I think it's an overall very comprehensive and very thoughtful document. Kudos to Martha and team for developing it and drafting it for sure. Just I guess a procedural question. I think one of the recommendations, it might have been the second one, and if I recall what it said, something like the city and county should align the guidelines on something or other. I can't recall which one it was.
Yeah, it's one of them for sure.
Yeah, align city and county rent. Yeah, that's the one. So my question is, since the city decided to jump off this stagecoach, and now this is solely a county task force, how likely, Martha, Rick, Jeff, is it that the city may even consider listening to our recommendations now that they've formally jumped off? Yeah, of course, these recommendations are very, they make sense. It's common sense. It's very practical. But I think we talked about this before when they initially jumped off. But how likely are you that the city may?
So Alan, let me hit that. So while the city has jumped off, and I think that was pretty politically driven by the city's housing group felt like that they were being usurped by the Housing Stability Task Force, and that's why the city moved off. And so we are in direct communications with the city's housing committee, run by council members, and the city has definitely been. We've been continuing to have conversations with the city. I think that just because the city pulled out of the task force, I don't think they're not listening to us at this point. I think that unfortunately was a sort of political move that the mayor had to satisfy some council members who got a little out of joint as a result of the ordinance that we sort of supported. So with that said, I think the city and the county both communicate with each other. I think that the fundamental challenge that we have with reconciling programs like this between the city and the county is that, and I think this has to do with the CARES Act issues, because the CARES Act has clawback mechanisms. So if the city or the county spends their care money in contravention to the CARES Act, then the federal government can ask them to pay the money back. And so the county has taken a much more conservative view in terms of documentation early on in the process. And that's what we were talking about earlier. And we were trying to reconcile those programs with the city and the county, but because of those sort of fundamental differences in how they run their businesses in terms of what risks they're willing to take, on distributing funds like this. That's where the major differences were. And so, and those are hard to reconcile because those are sort of almost, sort of institutional challenges that you have. And so, and you're always going to have challenges between the city and the county just because they're different institutions run differently and all the politics are all different and all that. So with that said, I think they try to work together and they try to get things as coalesced together. I think the city is listening, the county is working together with the city, but they're always going to have differences, and hopefully we can reconcile those differences that create situations like having to give back $10 million of rental assistance money that gets sent out to a different group. So they always have their interpretations of the CARES Act issues, and we're going to have to just work through those issues.
We have another question. Go ahead, Alan.
Just to follow up, Rick, I like your premise early on that you're saying that we as a task force through you and your influence there, that we're still able to have an impact with the city, and so that's helpful.
Yeah.
The point of the question is that as long as we're driving for impact, whether it be for the city and the county, or for both, ideally, then that was the premise of my question. So kudos to you and the team. I think these are great recommendations for sure.
Well, I think we just have to try to get a consensus, because this group, when you think about trying to get consensus of this group, I mean, it's not easy, right? I mean, we have some really polarized, just because you have on the one hand, housing advocates and landlords on the other, and it's hard to get consensus. So when we do get consensus, people listen, whether they're part of the task force or not. And that's why, like on the ordinance, I thought it was amazing to get consensus on the ordinance deal, and it showed that we can come together as a group, and I think that's important. We can listen to each other, we can agree to disagree on lots of stuff, but on the other hand, when we do come together, it's powerful, I believe, whether the city's part of it or not.
We do have another question from Donna, so I'm muting.
Okay. Hey, Donna.
Okay, hi guys. I hope you can hear me. I think
Yep.
I'm unmuted. Okay. I have a couple of comments. One regarding the vote itself. I would like to know why, if others listed any comments, why those comments weren't circulated, even if they're circulated anonymously. In other words, if there were recommendations made in the voting process being one of my real problems in the way that the other proposal was put to the whole Housing Stability Task Force, I'd like to know what other people's comments are. My sense is, having received a number of phone calls yesterday in response to my letter to the task force, that there are people who, for whatever the reason, are not piping up here. And so if you all have recommendations from other people who've voted no, or even voted yes, but with a comment, I think it's imperative that you share those. So that's one thing.
No problem. We'll be happy to share the comments. It's not a problem at all. There's no attempt to hide it. The concern that we had was just as we were doing this, it was being done electronically, which is just more complicated to share all the comments. But that's not a problem at all. And I think that the working group members who all discussed all of these recommendations before supporting them can weigh in. There were, healthy discussions and disagreements on various things, and I think that the comments that were reflected for the people that have gone online and voted reflect that. Having said that, I think that where we are right now is we wanted to try to get a vote from the task force for the group of recommendations as a whole, which has come forward as a package from the working group.
I'm looking forward to seeing other people's comments, because I only come with my perspective as a legal services attorney on behalf of tenants. Having said that, I'd like to share what my comments were and the reason why we voted against this recommendation. The second paragraph, or I shouldn't call it a paragraph, the second part of the recommendation includes a section that would require landlords to commit. And then there's a paragraph that talks about what landlords need to commit to. And we categorically reject any relief going to tenants that's going to require a commitment from landlords, because in our experience, landlords are not committing. They'd rather not commit to avoid filing litigation or to evade a case. If they have recourse in court, they're going for it. And so if we want to, once again, and we've talked about, I mean, I feel like this has been kind of the talk that everybody's piping up about. If we want to make any relief contingent upon a landlord's commitment, we have a problem with that. So that was one reason that we rejected the proposal. The other has to do with the third section, and the third section talks about mediation for unrepresented tenants, which we categorically reject for reasons that I'm more than happy to go into on this call or on another call. But legal service providers have across the board said over and over again that a landlord and a tenant have plenty of opportunity to try to reach some kind of agreement, harmony, accord, payment, especially when Uncle Sam is paying the bill with CARES Act dollars. And if the parties cannot come to an agreement because of direct relief that's being funded or some other source of funding, then trying to pretend that a mediation program is going to solve this is not the way to couch a relief program. I'll tell you, I think maybe anecdotally, the most telling detail is that across the Eviction Defense Coalition, and that's not just Lone Star Legal Aid, it's 5 organizations, including Houston Volunteer Lawyers, who's involved with training your mediators. We look through all of our cases. There is not a single case where we are defending a tenant in litigation where we have asked—
Donna, if I can just interrupt for a second, we're focusing on the rental assistance working group recommendations right now.
I want to finish this one point because it's very important for the understanding of why this third recommendation was rejected by Lone Star. When tenants ask for mediation in litigation, either the landlord or the court or both say no. And so for a rent relief program to couch itself in terms of a mediation program, I think is really remiss. I think that the angle of putting unrepresented tenants into a mediation program with the hope of funneling relief through mediation is the wrong street to put them on. And for that reason, we also rejected the program.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody,
comments on the list?
And Elaine is going to screen share the comments that have been received. I want everyone on the task force to be fully confident that there's going to be full transparency in the comments that people make. So Elaine is screen sharing the comments that have come in thus far of the people that voted electronically or that put their comments on the rental assistance working group, which is the only thing we're talking about right now.
So we have it up there.
Yep, they're up there. So why don't you just scroll through them, Elaine, if you could?
Yes. So
you don't need to read them, Elaine. Let's just quickly put them up there and let people glance at them for a second.
Is everyone able to read them, or do I need to read them out loud?
Why don't you make it a little bit larger if you can zoom in on your screen, Elaine?
And Stephen, I think for transparency for this group, I would urge the task force leaders to send these kind of input from other people voting broadly. I'm happy to look at it quickly on the screen here and now, but I think that for us to have meaningful input on a proposal to the county, we should be able to hear one another. And having yesterday by phone, I think that there are others who feel the same way.
Donna, that's
okay. It was unintentional. It was unintentional. We're trying to manage having prolonged, full conversations with. But we're more than happy to just put the Google Docs
allow everyone to access and see both the votes and the comments of others. So that's not a problem at all. We'll just give everyone on the task force full viewing rights of everything that comes in, and I think that should satisfy that concern.
Thank you.
You bet. Okay, so I think that with that, we'll electronically make sure everybody has full viewing rights. And Rick, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, I think the real issue today is, do we want to vote on this as a task force, or do we want to circulate the, these comments? I think your comment, I hear you, Don, on your comments, but I don't want to also have a situation where we're not, because I agree, we all need, the challenge you have with this kind of format, obviously, trying to get things done electronically can be complicated. Getting things done in big groups like this is hard as well. But I sort of take some comfort in the fact that there are a number of, that the subcommittee unanimously, supports the document. There's a substantial number of people represented on that. So we can, why don't we do this? Why don't we, what I'd like to do is find out from the task force today, is everybody comfortable with voting on this at this point, or do you want to get more information and do it electronically? I'm happy to, if we can, is there a wide, thought to delay this and to circulate all the comments that were made, or do we want to go ahead and vote on it today? Maybe the way
would that technically be a motion for cloture?
Yeah. So here's the deal. When you look at, if people would raise their hands and say, would you want to vote on it today or delay it? Look, I'm good. I want to make sure that everybody's comfortable and that you've had all the full information. I'm comfortable voting on it today, given that the task force, I don't agree with everything on it either, but that doesn't necessarily mean that broadly it isn't a good document. So
Rick, can I maybe suggest that you do either yes, no, or defer? And that way we can get a sense of where everybody comes down that's on the call.
You want to do that? Do you want to do that in the chat feature?
I think if you just ask for a show of hands, people can raise their hands on their Zoom buttons, and we can just do it. If you do first, okay, yes.
So let's do a raise of hands. Do we want to do a yes today? Approving the document. So people raise their hands yes, if you want to do that. And
can I make a suggestion that might get us to agreement on this more quickly? Sorry, this is Celeste. I hear all of Donna's comments, and I was confused also because I was like, is she talking about which access to justice or the rental assistance document, right? So clearly we're voting on the rental assistance recommendation, but she pointed out to me, and I didn't notice because I'm in Georgia, frankly, and I can't read everything super detailed, but she pointed out that there is a reference to the suggestion that tenants and landlords be directed to mediation services. And I wonder if the rental assistance work group would be okay just being silent on that question and allowing the access to justice work group really work through that as the legal experts. I personally am opposed to the mediation process. I think it's frustrating for tenants. But I also recognize that that's not my primary area of expertise. So I would feel better about this whole recommendation if the rental assistance working group agreed to just, remove that piece from our recommendation and let the access to working group wrestle with that question themselves.
Martha, what do you think?
I think that am I unmuted here?
No, you're not. We can hear you.
Okay. No, I think that works, that it really doesn't impact any of the other recommendations as I think through it quickly. And as I see from the chat, the work group members are supporting that amendment.
Okay.
And Rick, let me just say from the court's perspective that when folks come to court, when landlords come to court, it's not necessarily the landlord that's coming to court. So the decision maker is not there, right? So striking the mediation piece, procedurally, I don't think it will, hurt or help one way or the other. So,
So if we're going to modify the document, what to bring us all together, what about striking the landlord-tenant agreement or the tenant requirement? Because I will tell you that the landlord requirement is an impediment for landlords to do things. If Mary was required to do certain things, then she may not, take money, right? And I think that's one of the issues in a lot of other cities is that the landlord requirement issue is an issue that is an impediment. So if we're gonna, if Donna, your issues, we've already eliminated one of them, it sounds like. So is there a way to modify that landlord commitment as well?
And I just found it. It's include requirements for tenants and landlords that promote long-term housing stability. And one of the bullets says, refer tenants and landlords to available mediation services. So that will be removed from the rental assistance recommendations and will be evaluated by the Access to Justice work group after the holidays.
Elaine, let's make sure everybody's on board with that. Are there any issues with eliminating that piece?
Well, it sounds like Martha said through the chat that they're good with it.
Everybody's okay. All right.
Okay.
I just want to confirm, I think there's another section beyond that. If you'll just give me a moment, I believe it was a paragraph that started with the landlord commitment. And I just want to make sure I'm referencing the correct letter. Certainly, and what was paragraph number 4, and I'm looking at the responsive Google form that's generated after my vote, the tenant landlord facilitated conversation, that pilot project was the second comment I had made. I don't think that is the avenue we want to send tenants in order to receive rent relief. That would be my perspective as a legal aid lawyer.
So there's opposition for the facilitated conversations pilot. Is that what you're saying, Donna?
If we're routing funds to a forum where tenants and landlords need to meet and tenants are unrepresented by counsel, we are opposed to it, 100%.
Okay, that's fine. That's a helpful comment.
If you wanted to add a safeguard to say, we invite landlords and tenants to mediation, and at the door, tenants are given an attorney, we would be okay with that. We love mediation when tenants are represented by counsel.
Let me just point out that this was this is framed under using pilot projects to test new systems. So the recommendation here is that we try a pilot as an effort.
My concern,
which is obviously fully voluntary by everybody.
Yeah, my concern, Stephen, is if we're going to allocate extra millions of dollars that are going to go unutilized or underutilized, that's my concern. My concern is for instances that we're seeing where landlords are inflating the amount of rent that's due and then going to ask Catholic Charities or Baker Ripley or now Gulf Coast to pay the bill, and the tenant is unrepresented.
Well, the pilot is also part of the Access to Justice work group. Like that's one of their recommendations. So maybe this is also tabled for the Access to Justice work group to evaluate. I do want to note that the concept and all the details of the pilot are in our website, and that includes involvement of legal assistance. Houston Volunteer Lawyers is involved with the pilot.
Well, and not only are they involved, Elaine, not only are they involved, they are part of the process in that anything that comes through, it's kind of a triaging system where if there's something that an attorney needs to look at, they're referred directly to Houston Volunteer Lawyers. But
And one
I
other
don't think
final-
that this is the place to debate whether mediation is an appropriate response or not, or a valuable tool in landlord-tenant negotiations. What the intention of including it in here was, this is an example of an innovative pilot project, and that we support the use of pilot projects to discover their value or lack of value.
And while I appreciate that, I'm here to highlight from a tenant perspective that this sort of pilot project, if it receives funding, I think is entirely bad for unrepresented tenants. The other paragraph.
We can, this way, Mark, hold up. We can, honestly, we can go line by line. And then if 2/3 of the folks on the call don't agree on it, we'll strike it. So specifically, Donna, what?
I'm more than happy to take up the global discussion about whether mediation is appropriate in the Access to Justice Forum, which I understand is the appropriate place, to the extent that any funding for rent relief might be funneled through a mediation program, and we're now talking about rent relief. That's what I'm opposed to for this letter. I have one more point regarding landlord commitment that I'll circle back to before we're done, but on the mediation point, the only point I'm trying to make here is that even on a pilot basis, I think that this is a very bad idea for tenants. And I would cringe to circle back to this in 3 months from now and say, well, we as a task force made a recommendation to allocate funding to a program that legal services had told us would be a bad trap for tenants. We have better ways to provide rent assistance than through this mediation program. I'm letting you know.
Why don't we change this rather than tenant landlord facilitation? We just say innovative programs that CBOs can help tenants on.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay,
think
so
we
let's
remove
get
it.
rid of tenant landlord facilitated conversations. Just put a pilot and just say innovative programs led by community-based organizations to help tenants who've fallen behind on the rent. Period.
Mary's asking, what's the problem with the facilitated discussion? The problem is that putting a landlord and a tenant in a mediation forum with the stamp of approval of Harris County is tantamount to a bullying effort on debt collection. And I will also add, and I really cringe to speak for Lisa Everett because she's not here, or for Houston Volunteer Lawyers because they're not here, but the Eviction Defense Coalition meets, I think we're now up to 3 and 4 times every week because of emergent issues. And the feedback that we have regarding the mediation program is that there's no amount of education and training that she's given where she's getting questions back that are, basically a request for a law school education.
Right, so I get all that. So let's
paraphrasing the response.
I get
The
that.
response I got was that it's hard enough to train the clerks of the court with emergent information. Now we're trying to train social workers and other people. And so I have separate feedback regarding the mediation program in general. We can take that up in Access to Justice.
So we need to move on this. So let's agree. Let's make this less facilitated tenant landlord and just say innovative programs based on CBOs. Okay, to help tenants behind. Because I think there are CBOs that are doing really innovative things. We need to make sure that we're seeing what they are. But let's take out the reference to facilitation and mediation. Okay. Now, can we agree on the point above where the landlord issue?
The other landlord issue is, again, in number 2, that is in the responsive Google form that I got that says include requirements for tenants and landlords. There are 3 bullet points. The first one starts, landlords should commit. And I think any commitment you're expecting out of a landlord is a roadblock. I think that the linchpin of a tenant getting relief, that where a tenant needs to get landlord participation, agreement, compliance, forms, applications, is going to fail.
I think, I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think the issue is, if we just put landlord, get rid of the commitment and just have rental assessment does not eliminate prior debts, leave those 2 bullets in and get rid of that other bullet. because you're just talking about assisting tenants and execute payment plans, which landlords are doing anyway. And the same thing with late fees. They can consider it doesn't mean they're required to do it. So let's eliminate that bullet. Martha, you okay eliminating the bullet?
My concern is, I don't know how to frame it. My concern is just that, if there's any intent to elicit input or any participation by a landlord, you are minimizing the pool of tenants who will get access to this relief.
Martha, are you okay with taking that change?
I think, could we read through it one more time?
Yeah, the commitment, landlords should commit to not evict tenants who, that is the issue. And I will tell you, I agree with Dana on this, because if you look at programs around the country, the ones that require landlords to do things are having trouble giving their money away.
If it's,
she is exactly right. They don't want to commit to losing any of their legal rights. And if it's about getting money to people easy and fast without issues, then this is a roadblock.
I just want to clarify, it's unfortunate that we can't get landlords who are receiving money to commit that they won't evict tenants. But this is one hook into the other, which is the goal here is to simply excise landlords from the process. The moment
Rick, can I just weigh in? I think we're dishonoring the work of the rental assistance working group trying to make all these changes on the fly. I think in light of this, we should make sure that everyone who's been on the rental assistance working group honor their work and allow us to just reconvene that group in light of the comments made and come back to the full task force with the recommendation.
Diana, you want to talk really quickly? I understand.
Yeah, sorry, I'm driving, so it's been a little hard to jump in. I mean, I personally, being a part of the work group, feel like it was a really decent process, and we did hear everyone, and it, like you said, isn't 100% for every interest or perspective, but it's quite close and represents good consensus. So I think, given the access to justice issues on the mediation pilot and the need to really be more informed about what is already underway and address any concerns, I think that makes sense to be silent on here. But I mean, I would hate personally to just not move forward with the significant amount of work that's been done during a time where we're expected to see a moratorium expire in like a couple of weeks, and all of the trends, and including the January advisors dashboard, but also the census pulse data that just came out in November, like we're seeing the signs that this is only going to get worse in the near term. So I'm a little bit, I just regret that we can't get it done, but if that's where we all are and we don't feel comfortable voting on it,
well,
then
we can do a vote.
I don't think, let's just take it to a vote. If people don't agree to move forward, we won't move forward. But I mean, at the end of the day, we have a process of.
All right, well, let's take it to a vote at this point. So go under your buttons and raise your hand if you vote yes.
Quick, Rick, quick question. Are we pressed against the deadline? Are we pressed against the CDC moratorium December 31st deadline?
I think that's why.
I think the short answer to that is yes, Alan. I think, as of the time of this vote, the Congress has not done anything and there's no extension, which is why I think we wanted to try to get this done before the potential end of the month.
So let's go ahead and call a vote, and then that way people can vote if they're comfortable, and if they're not comfortable, vote no. And then we will, and we'll see what happens. So
can we get, there's some questions on, are we voting on the original or are we voting with the changes?
We're voting on the original with the changes, taking out the mediation issue, and that was it.
Okay.
We're gonna leave everything else the same.
Yes.
Okay.
Quick, may I, one more second, please. Dana, are you comfortable with the changes as made?
I'm comfortable with the fact that mediation's been taken out. I cannot vote in favor of anything that's got landlord commitments in it.
Okay.
I just don't see that as being friendly to tenant ability to get rent relief. This is exactly what happened with Baker Ripley money, $10 million of which is now allocated away from rent relief by the county. So no, I'll be voting against it. And I disagree that this is urgent for right now, whether Congress extends the CDC or not. A proposal vote on this letter is not going to make a lick of difference on county or city agenda between now and the end of the year. This is too little, too late, friends.
And Donna, I respectfully disagree. So we can just move forward with the vote.
All right, go ahead. So everybody know how to vote?
Claire, you want to just make sure to tell people how to vote?
So my recommendation is everyone put your vote in the chat. Just say if you're yes, for, or you abstain from the vote. That way everyone can see what everyone's saying.
Claire, unfortunately, I don't have access to my chat. That's a Wells Fargo issue.
You tell it, if you're willing to say it publicly, I can write it into the chat and say it's coming from you. So we have the record. Alan, are you for or abstain?
And we already had prior votes for people that did not, that voted electronically before.
Claire, I'm for it.
This is a good thing about democracy.
You can all agree to disagree.
All right. Hey, it was a few weeks ago. I'm in a staff Paris committee at my church, and we were voting to give my pastor a raise. And I was on, and I spent 10 minutes on why we couldn't give him a raise. Yet I was the only no vote. So luckily, I'm on a committee next year, so I'll continue to be a no vote.
You a no vote?
Yeah. Giving a raise during a pandemic at a church?
No, I'm talking about a no vote on this.
Oh no, I'm a yes vote. No, I'm a yes vote. Oh, yeah. You say.
Okay, so let's move on to our speaker.
Yeah, and Claire will tally the votes, and we'll come back to it after our speaker. So an inducement for everybody to stay on the line. So delighted to have Professor Vince Reyna, and you all have seen his bio. Vince, you're seeing the task force in action, so we appreciate your patience as we work through that issue, and we will turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you for having me. I apologize. I'm in like our attic right now because our daughter, it turns out, had a half day, and so she gets the prime room and I get the attic. But really honored to be here today, and actually to hear that conversation going on. To be honest, these are very much the conversations I've been very much involved with, but I would say they don't all happen in the same room, right? And so the fact that you all are in the same room having these very tough conversations is really essential, because that's one of the biggest hurdles going on right now, but that's not specific to COVID, right? So I wanted to just, share a little bit about what we've been doing so you could get a broader sense of context, because I think the better use today would be for me to kind of identify myself as a resource as needed and what kind of content we can share in the long term. But I'll offer some preliminary thoughts here as well. So I'm on the faculty at Penn. I'm the director of the Housing Initiative at Penn. I'm an academic, but I started my career at HUD, and then I worked at LISC for a while. So I've worked in the field of housing and housing finance a bit. And so I'm ultimately like really interested in the praxis, the intersection of research and practice, right? So Martha, I came in and you were talking about the need to build evidence base. I like entered at the right exact time, right? And so what I've been doing is I've been actively working with the city of Philadelphia for quite some time. I helped them write their 10-year housing plan. I helped a stakeholder group in Cincinnati work on a housing strategy, and I'm helping the city of Cleveland write their first citywide 10-year housing plan. Right now, we're going through that process. But in Philadelphia, I've been working with them on various initiatives, and one of which was their COVID rent relief program. The work with Philadelphia actually quickly spurred into work with other cities. And so over the past 6 months, I've worked with the city of Philadelphia, Baltimore, Atlanta, LA City, LA County, Oakland, and Cleveland around their rent relief efforts. So I will say none of this was fee for service, right? This was all through kind of academic interest and interest in civic partnerships, and also broader interest in research. And so part of the efforts have been really to help them understand what other people are doing, how they're doing things, why they're doing things, and also to try to embed a real research and evaluation component within the programs that were developed. Not all of those cities developed new programs. Not all of those really created rent relief programs, but 4 of them did, and were actually involved in an ongoing evaluation of those programs themselves. By ongoing evaluation, I mean within the actual application, people enrolled in our study, and they were offered the opportunity to fill out a baseline survey for our study. Totally optional. We reimbursed them with a gift card, and we're following a cohort of households across LA City, LA County, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Baltimore over time to look at the impact of receiving assistance and not receiving assistance on their outcomes. Within this as well, one of the things we're doing is we're surveying property owners. So we released a survey that 600 property owners in Philadelphia replied to about owner needs before COVID, during COVID, whether they're engaging in rental assistance programs. Many of the things that you were talking about, like those restrictions, people's perceptions of what they feel about those restrictions, what things are reasonable, what things are not reasonable, all those kinds of questions. And I'm actually releasing a report on Monday in conjunction with the Reinvestment Fund, who's been doing direct interviews with property owners, lawyers, attorneys, property managers, that kind of tells the story, at least from the property owner perspective, of what's going on within Philadelphia itself. We're rolling out a similar survey today in Los Angeles we have about 80,000 owners on our list. We're hoping to get a good response. We don't know what kind of response we'll get, and we'll be rolling that out in other cities as well. Beyond that, I've been partnering with the National Low Income Housing Coalition and the Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy. And what we did is we did a national survey of cities, municipalities, regions, states, to understand who's developing rent relief programs, what they look like, what take-up rates have been, what they view as successes and challenges related to those programs, and what that means for things going forward. So we're in the midst of an in-depth analysis of those data. We had about 170 different government entities respond. Some of them were whole state with statewide programs. Some of them were cities with citywide programs. Some were regional programs or county programs. And so we're in the mix of really diving into those data to understand what's going on where and why. So not surprisingly, across all of these metrics, right? Things are very complicated. As you all know well, you're in the thick of it, right? All the more complicated by the fact that the original funding from the federal government is due to expire at the end of the month, uncertainty about extensions, a CEC moratorium expiring, right? Unsure about what January looks like across the board, both with respect to additional rental assistance, extension of current assistance, and extension of any legal protections, and anything more broadly than that. I've also been involved in a lot of national conversations around the kind of policy agenda and things to do going forward. And so I say that all to say that I'm not going to be able to present everything we've learned. And to be honest, we're still in the process of learning. And that's one of the challenges generally of research, right? Is you often learn a lot of really interesting and important points after they're relevant, but hopefully they inform the next time around. But I will say we are definitely learning or seeing distinct realities and trends, and also learning specific things that I think help the design of current programs and responses, whether it be a rent relief program, whether it be an eviction diversion program, and things along those lines. And so I just want to highlight a couple of things, right? And I would say, I say this knowing full well that you all are experts in what you are doing. So many of the things that I say here are just confirmatory for you, and maybe that's helpful or maybe that's not, right? But some of this might be somewhat new information for you as well. So unsurprisingly, right, you all know this doesn't need to be said, which is that the level of need for low-income households is real and deep and ongoing and getting worse, right? When we look at just the survey that we're doing of households at the baseline, and even now, the trade-offs that low-income households are facing are really profound, right? And they're only getting worse. People who are already in debt accruing more debt, people on the verge of housing instability, falling into housing instability. And it does seem that the rental assistance does help, right? So rent relief programs do help, but they're clearly not a panacea, right? On the owner side as well, these realities were real before the pandemic, as you all know, particularly for smaller owners. In our engagement with owners, we're seeing that smaller owners generally were more likely to be facing a lot of challenges related to maintaining and running their portfolio, the financial viability of their portfolio. They were also, though, more willing to engage in government programs, be it rent relief programs, and also specifically rent relief programs with restrictions on them, right? Smaller owners are more likely to see restrictions on these programs as reasonable, and those restrictions include banning evictions while receiving assistance, and even a short time thereafter, forgiving some portion of back rent, and entering into repayment agreements, right? So those findings are Philadelphia specific. That said, it's not perfect, right? There are plenty of small owners who did not find it reasonable. It's just the majority did find it reasonable, right? Larger owners tend to find these concessions to be less reasonable. They seem to be having fewer hardships before the pandemic, but clearly some signs showing up during it, but not as extreme as smaller landlords. They're less likely to agree to concessions that's tied to assistance, but they're also, again, less likely to want to enter some of these assistance programs. We're seeing overall that one of the biggest challenges, there are several big challenges to rent relief programs. One is generally the process, right? So just the act of getting a program up and running, getting people to apply, certifying things, it takes a long time, right? Municipalities who have taken more conservative views of CARES Act funding have had a harder time processing applications. So some places have gone through self-certification. A lot of places have gone through requiring direct documentation. Those places that require self-certification or use self-certification clearly are not only getting more applicants, they're actually getting more people flowing through their systems more quickly. And again, those decisions actually, interestingly enough, and this is part of the debate I think you all are having, or I might have kind of gotten a hold of a little bit in the beginning, is just as much a function of regs or more a function of interpretation of a regs than regs themselves, right? There's a lot of concern about how the federal government will treat a lot of their rules around CARES Act funding. And there's a lot of display here of how localities want to interpret those rules, how local lawyers interpret those rules. We've seen cities take very conservative views of those rules and other cities take more liberal views of those rules. And so while we can't say which one is actually correct, we will say clearly, as we would expect, right? Places that have taken more liberal interpretation of those views have been able to get more applicants and process more people through it. Another challenge has been then through an owner-based model, getting owners then to agree to consent to be a part of the program. So across the sites we're working with, I would say that it's generally around a third of owners are not engaging in rent relief programs. In one site, it was as many as half of owners were not willing to engage in programs. And so that's a large number, right? But in some ways that shouldn't be surprising because, when we look at the voucher program, right, often voucher use rates are at best 50%, right? There are a lot of reasons why an owner might not want to engage in a program. Something that we uncovered from our owner survey is that many owners are already making concessions with tenants that they might have agreed to before rent relief programs even came online, right? So if you already made compromises or you already have a scenario where you and your tenant normally make these kinds of compromises, you might be less likely to want to formalize some of those compromises in a program or agree to additional ones in a program itself after you've entered those, right? So there's a lot of factors that can affect owner participation. Some of them are restrictions, right? Some of them are a lack of desire to engage in government programs at all, right? We have to acknowledge that there are a lot of great owners. There's some owners as well who just are not great owners, right? We don't know what share of people that is, but that's going to be some share, right? There's going to be owners who never want to register their property to the city. There's some owners who express concern about what it means for their tax liability. And so, these are kind of clear challenges that show up in the ownership participation rate. One thing some municipalities, or two in particular, Philadelphia and LA, have done is what they have said is, we do not feel that it is fair for a tenant to not receive rental assistance if an owner does not agree to participate in the program. So those two cities notably have actually converted the remainder of their funds to direct to tenant cash transfers. So what they've done is for all tenants who apply for rental assistance where an owner either did not respond, which is often a passive way of saying no, and I know that because we've surveyed owners and I have the data of who's actively and passively said no to the, or who's actively said no to the city, who's not responded. And I could see some of them responded to my survey about preferences, but didn't respond to the city's outreach. I'm using the same email address, right? So again, this isn't every owner. And I think this is the challenge generally is we often get into this spot of kind of pointing fingers and generalizing to the whole based on a few, but these are important data points because I think we should also remember that we can't expect 100% success rate in any program, especially in a program like this, especially in programs occurring during a pandemic, right? So I don't really remember where I was there, but so owner participation rate, direct to tenant. So what they're doing is they're actually giving a direct cash transfer to a household to where the owner did not agree to participate in the program, right? Because they felt like that was enough justification. If someone applied and qualified, they should not be precluded from actually receiving assistance. Overall, you know, there's a lot of challenges to running these programs, not the least of which is outreach related to them. And so what we saw was that municipalities who had very active outreach partners were most able to get enough applicants and then get the money out the door, right? A lot of municipalities, well over half that we surveyed across the country, did not even get enough applicants, right? It's hard to apply for housing assistance, no less in a pandemic. We know there's internet issues, access to internet, right? We can't function in a paper-based society. There's traditionally marginalized groups that normally fall out of all of these systems generally, and that's only going to become worse during times like this, right? So there's a lot of those existing realities. There's also the reality of a lot of the existing outreach strategies that are often used are ones that you can often use on the fly like this. You have the resources to push out. And so what we've seen is that, you know, municipalities who have thought creatively about ways to do that have really excelled at both getting enough applicants and also being able to process those applicants. I guess I'm going to stop there because I feel like I said a lot of different things that weaved across each other. To be honest, I could keep going for quite some time, and I apologize for not having slides. Steve and I made contact the other day, and I figured I might as well just come and spit out a lot of things, but hopefully this will be the start of a long-term conversation. But that's all to say is there's a lot going on, a lot that's been learned already, a lot more to learn. And I just want to echo Martha's comment again early on. I think as much as you could see this as an opportunity to build evidence-based practice going forward, this is going to be really important, right? Sadly, this is probably not our last crisis, right? We've been here before, we'll be here again, and I think we have a really big and important learning opportunity. In the last mortgage foreclosure crisis, there wasn't this focus on renters the way we're seeing in this current crisis. And so I think there's a real learning opportunity. And I also know, as you all likely know very well, that there is a current incoming administration that seems really keen to learn from what's going on right now, not only to kind of set goals for this coming year, but also to think about how this might provide lessons for reframing forms of housing assistance, forms of owner support, where those gaps are, and how we can make existing kind of tools work better. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Vincent. I mean, we're approaching the 12 o'clock time, so I'm sensitive of everybody's time. Do we have one or two quick questions for Vincent? That means you did a great job, Vincent, in your presentation.
It does look like we have one question from Curtis.
Okay, go ahead.
You, Curtis, if you.
No, that was an older.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
No, he did a great job. I'm cool.
All right.
And I would say that there is a, you know, I see there's a question here about the direct to tenant option. Mary, did you want to?
Let me.
Clay, you can just read the question. I think Mary put it in the chat.
Sure. If landlords who don't participate in the program can get paid their rent without agreeing to any of the program restrictions because tenants get direct payment, won't that encourage other owners to withdraw from the program?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, there could be some buyer's remorse there, right? Which is that once both on the tenant and the owner side. I mean, at this point, they've entered agreements, and I would say Philadelphia, their program actually they used all their funds, and they got more applicants than they expected than they could serve, and they actually had a fair number of restrictions on in their program itself. And so some owners might feel a little concerned about that. I mean, that said, to be honest, a lot of the owners, at least in the Philadelphia context, who a lot of owners of lower cost units are smaller property owners, right? Or owners of fewer units. And they were also already more likely to make concessions, right? So I think we found, at least in Philadelphia, there was often a misconception about kind of the level of concessions owners were willing to make. I think there is a challenge, though, of how formal maybe people want to be about those. That's definitely a clear component, right? But definitely could be some buyer remorse there. I mean, that said, the challenge here too is a tenant doesn't necessarily have to spend their money towards rent, right? All of the numbers suggest they will spend the majority of their money towards it, both in our survey data, but also just in past research. But there is a portion of this that probably won't go to the unit, right? And that's a certain loss factor for the owner, but that can clearly show up potentially in different outcomes for a tenant who might spend that on education, on healthcare costs, things along those lines, right? And that's something we're trying to understand a little more as well, as what people actually do with that cash transfer.
And we do have another question from Diana.
Hey, this is actually not really a question. It's more like a wish or a hope, which is I want to take Vincent, Renee, Cynthia, Elena, Mary, a couple of other people and put them together for like 12 hours to work through what the ideal design is based on all the learning that's happened. Because if we're betting that money, a big tranche of money is coming soon, then what would we actually say? How would we want to spend it? And what design are we going to use based on all the iterations that we've had to date? So I don't know. I don't think that we've gotten that granular yet and really specific. And Renee, I saw your idea around 3 tranches, but I think that would be hugely valuable to do if we're willing to put in some time to do it.
Yeah, from my perspective, now having done this throughout 2020 and dealing with rental assistance program, I think flexibility is the key, but at the same time prioritizing. So what I meant by my comment is that, we didn't have that flexibility in this rental assistance program. The program was somehow designed, it was designed in partnership with us, but a lot of the parameters were also set out by the county or the city. But going forward, that flexibility would be very helpful to us in the administration of these dollars. And by that, I meant is put most of the dollars in prevention, which is where you have a landlord participation, where you try to get some landlord concessions and opportunities there to prevent future evictions. Put some monies there, but then put some monies also when you are already at the point of eviction, where you have a diversion program. So like for us, we didn't have the ability to get the names from the county judges or get the names from Lone Star Legal Aid and work with those particular families that were already on the brink. And there was the pros and cons of that. It's like, well, if you put all your money in diversion, does that encourage landlords to go through the eviction process? Well, yeah, it might do that for some of those. That's why you have a combination of those approaches. And then the final bucket that I would put money in that, again, we didn't have that flexibility, is then how do you deal with those tenants whose landlords aren't participating? And that's one that you cannot ignore, because those are tenants who usually are in very different types of rental units, right? Those are not the multifamilies, sometimes larger multifamily apartments or properties where those landlords are wanting to participate in the program and adhere to some of the landlord requirements. So again, just from our perspective going forward, if there was more flexibility in how the programs are operated, I think that we can kind of address some of these concerns.
And with that, Renee, it's almost with that clarity about the goals of each of those programs, right? reducing housing debt versus preventing eviction versus preventing a homelessness versus ensuring owners are able to maintain their properties and stabilize their properties. Those are all related, but also different things, right? And so to your point, that's really the flexibility and the differentiation is actually a really important piece, because I think right now we're cramming that all into rental assistance. And then there's always going to be someone in each of those groups who it just really doesn't work out for. In aggregate, then that works out for it not working for 40% of people, right? Or something like that. So then what do you do with those 40%, right? And how do you actually make sure that they're served?
Vincent, is Philadelphia, is it all federal money, or are they putting local and state money into the rental assistance program?
Sorry, I think I accidentally muted in there. They're all federal money. So they put a mix of the Treasury funds, which are inherently more flexible, and CDBG funds. And so the CDBG funds tend to be a little more restrictive, whereas like things flowing through the Treasury have been less restrictive. And so,
but
yeah.
the CDBG funds don't expire on December 30th.
Right.
So they're much more flexible in terms of the time that you have to spend them.
Yeah. Yes, and ESG funds are the most flexible because they with respect to the expiration and the length of time you could use them for. Exactly. It just that's just a challenge of reallocation in a period of resource scarcity, right? And so I would say, the city of Philadelphia was actually developing like a rental demonstration program. We had announced it. The mayor's office announced it the week before COVID hit. And then COVID hit, and as like everywhere else, there's just no local funds beyond federal pass-throughs at this point, unfortunately.
And Vince, I apologize that I think we are at our witching hour here. I think there certainly is. You may not have been paying attention in the chat, but I think that there is great enthusiasm, as I think Diana expressed. And so I think what we may want to do is rope you back in and have a smaller conversation with some of the folks that have been most intimately involved, and really try to see where an extended conversation might go. So, but we really just appreciate all the work you've been doing nationally and taking the time to both share with us and indulge us as we were going through the sausage making process. And in that regard, I think just to let folks know, it does not really seem as if we're going to be able to move forward with a consensus recommendation of the 2/3. There's some confusion about how to deal with people who had voted previously online, given the changes that occurred. And so what we think, in order to be able to make sure all of us are clear, is we will try to reconvene the rental assistance working group and then come back with any changes or modifications to the recommendations they make to the full task force, and then allow people to vote with the full task force. And either we will do that online and give everybody full access to viewing everyone else's comments and votes, or we'll do it at the next full task force meeting. With that, Jeremy, maybe I will just wish everybody a happy holidays and turn it over to you. I think Rick had to drop off as well.
I know, since we're running over, just happy holidays, everybody, and thank you for the fruitful conversation. Thank you, Vincent, for your presentation.
Thanks, everyone.